I kept hitting a dead end of them being like, well, you don't really have anything in the film festival world. I just got pretty angry. And I was like, how can I prove that I can do this? And so I started my own nonprofit film festival in Los Angeles, but I'd kind of gotten to the place where I didn't feel like I was really growing, and I was really interested in virtual reality and where this was going. We launched that game studio and started building it up. We had investment lined up. Everything was kind of looking perfect. We were kind of on that perfect rocket trajectory. And then right after COVID, where basically the gaming industry started to have a big downward trend, there was major layoff, a major bloodbath. And so we had to end up closing the company after a decent amount of runway.
The company's doing great, and then all of a sudden there's this downturn. How do you deal with that, grieve or deal with some of those emotions?
As I said, it was really difficult decision to make. The whole process of even...
Hey, Meg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to learn about your journey to building a startup. So we kind of do a connect the dots for the podcast. So if you could take us back to when you were younger and just what kind of interests did you have? This can be your childhood or, high school kind of years, just to give us a little context of your background.
Yeah. So, trying to think back of maybe how the story makes sense. I feel like I had a very non-linear path to where I got. But I would say the one kind of through line is I was always very interested in community events, bringing people together. I think the first event I organized when I was 5 or 6, it was actually a funeral ceremony for my turtle who had passed away. And I did I sent out invites to everyone in the neighborhood and my family, and I made a little what do you call it, an agenda for the day, who would speak, and everyone would come together. And so I was always doing little, I was finding any excuse, I think, to make a gathering, an excuse for a gathering of some sort.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that was always there. And then I always really loved history. Yeah, since I was really little, I loved reading, I loved history. I think the biggest part of that was just hearing stories of people throughout time, right? And how
Mm.
they experienced their realities, what was going on in the different parts of the world at different times. And that was also a way for me of connecting with other viewpoints, and something that I was always really passionate about.
Yeah, I think the community piece, will see that coming up throughout your career. So it's interesting that from very early age, you already had this kind of natural, let me create this event to honor, this pet that's really cute.
Yeah.
So where did that take you next? What were the next things that came up for you?
Yeah. So, my interest in history actually led me to studying art history in college, which where my career went afterwards seems like it makes no sense, but there actually I think is a good, I wouldn't do anything differently if I was going to go back. I wanted to be a curator. I was really passionate about creating again kind of these moments where people could come together around arts to understand what different artists were saying, to interpret it, and just I was very interested in this whole concept of, when art meets audience, and it kind of catalyzes these new ideas and community. And so that's what I was really passionate about when I was going to college. I was at a nonprofit art gallery when I was in college interning. I did some volunteer and internships at LACMA, so big museums. And after I was kind of tactically on the ground there, I realized that it was not at all what I wanted to do. And that it was just not, the community was not the community that I was very passionate about. So I ended up pretty quickly realizing this is actually not the place for me. And then I went more into film. So I
Mm.
had always kind of grown up around film. I went to college in Los Angeles, so I was kind of surrounded by it. I was really passionate about the kinds of communities I had met in the film world, like LA Film Festival, which is actually no longer around, but was run by this nonprofit called Film Independent. And my big goal was to work at Sundance Film Festival.
Mm.
So that was kind of what I had set my target on. And I had started applying. I was getting pretty far in the interviews, and I kept hitting a dead end of them being like, well, you have a bunch of art gallery nonprofit experience, you don't really have anything in the film festival world. So I kept on kind of hitting that wall.
Mm,
And as part of that, I just got pretty like angry. And I was like, I can definitely do everything that they're saying is part of the job description. So how can I prove that I
mm.
can do this? And so I started my own nonprofit film festival in Los Angeles. It was called LA International Student Film Festival. And I inked a partnership with Regal, which is like a very big theater in downtown LA. Got fiscal sponsorship so I could start fundraising for it from this Pasadena Arts Council. Worked with Air Canada to bring in and cover flights for all the students who were coming in, and got a bunch of like prize pools together for the students. And then after I did that, I went back to Sundance, applied again, and I got the job. So that was kind of the story of how I got there.
That is an incredible story because I think, I see this now where people do want to pivot into like a different role or different career.
Yeah.
And they, especially now with everything being tech based, right? You don't even get an interview, right? So if you don't
Yeah.
have these things on your resume of, hey, I already did this, you're going to be thrown out already. So I love your story because it shows like, well, maybe I don't have the experience, but I'm going to create it myself. So
Yeah.
it seems like that showed up pretty early for you
Yeah.
to create it yourself. So where did that take you next after that?
Yeah. So then I was at Sundance for about 2 years, and it was amazing. One of the things that I got very into at Sundance was what was called the New Frontier Lab, so Sundance was kind of one of the first very big film festivals to really embrace immersive technology and really take it seriously as an art form. So the New Frontier Lab was basically where there was like augmented reality experiences, virtual reality experiences, and like some of the most cutting edge stuff was happening. So the first festival, when I kind of encountered all of the exhibitions and got to dive deeper into them, I just became obsessed and was like, okay, I think this is now where I want to go, which is again, it was like another like, okay, this is not exactly what I had planned, but I think I've always been someone that once I have my eye set on something, I sprint towards it very fast, and then I kind of hit a ceiling of where I can go, and then I start looking for where is the next place I can learn. And yeah, I have a lot of curiosity, so it's hard for me to stay happy in a situation where I kind of feel like I don't have any more growth. And so after my second year at Sundance, I'd broken the fundraising record the first year at Sundance. I was really excited my second year. I had all these new ideas, and they're kind of like, "Oh, like we don't really want new things. Like we just kind of want the same thing." You're kind of like Sundance is such a huge machine. It just doesn't really lend itself to people coming in and changing things in their little part of the machine, right? So I totally
Hmm.
understand it, but I'd kind of gotten to the place where I didn't feel like I was really growing, and I was really interested in virtual reality and where this was going. So then I wrote to one of the directors of a virtual reality studio that I had become close with, told her that I was really interested in working with her and that I wanted to leave Sundance. And then I got hired. And so then I went to work there. So that was my kind of like
Incredible.
next big, that was like my big churn, I think, into tech world
Hmm.
for sure. Yeah.
And what was interesting for you about like the immersive experience? What was that kind of like? I really see myself here.
I think it was just a new way of storytelling that I had never seen before, and that felt like a visceral form of storytelling. So, the place where I went to work very specifically specialized in immersive journalism. So, putting people on the ground in these 3D environments of, like, for instance, we did a piece on climate change. And
Mhm.
so we worked with NASA and GPL Labs. We went to Greenland and we took holograms of their scientists in Greenland standing next to the ice caps, so you can feel in real time how drastically these ice caps are depleting. So
Mm,
instead of it being like just an article you're reading about, oh, this is how much the ice caps have changed in the last decade, you're viscerally understanding the effects and you're in the actual environment. And it was just something that like couldn't be done in any other medium in that way that I was
mhm.
really excited about. And I did another piece that I ended up producing at that studio and then continued working with the artist for a while called Last Whispers, which was about the extinction of indigenous languages around the world.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting form of extinction, right? Because the form is silence, right? Like there's no one speaking those languages anymore. And the artist
Yeah.
that we work with, Lena Herzog, worked with UNESCO, a bunch of archives around the world to basically take these recordings of languages of someone speaking it for the very last time,
Mm.
turned it into like a musical oratorio,
Hmm.
and in the VR piece, you're in a beautiful forest, and each tree in the forest is one language that's kind of like speaking and singing to you as you're moving through the piece. And even though you can't maybe understand exactly what the languages are saying, you can feel this sense of like visceral understanding of all these other viewpoints from all around the world, and then they just extinguish, like they vanish. And so yeah, it was very much to me interesting of how virtual reality could tell stories and bring people together and bring ideas together in a way that no other medium could.
Wow, that's beautiful. That sounds like so powerful to be a witness to, I guess, that last bit of language being spoken. I can only imagine being in that space. So it sounds like from your experience, there's this theme of like storytelling, building community, bringing people together. Where does that take you next? What were you curious
Yeah.
about?
Yeah, so yeah, had done the virtuality thing for I think another 2 or 3 years, and I would say the biggest issue I had with it is, our pieces premiered at, LACMA and Venice Biennale, and I went back to Sundance, which was fun, as a producer with a piece in the festival, which was really cool. South by Southwest, like, it kinda had, like, all the critical acclaim you could think of,
Hmm.
but so few people were actually impacted by these pieces because no one has virtuality headsets,
Hmm.
and you can only move so many people through an exhibition every single day. You only have so many headsets, especially back then, the technology was
Hmm.
much more expensive than it even is today, and it's still not particularly cheap. Like, you probably don't have a VR headset at home, so
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't.
so yeah. So I think that started to be something I was thinking about a lot is like how much I want what I work on in the world to have a larger scale of impact, and how can I do that? So, along with some of the other people I was working with at the VR studio, started thinking about like where can we have more impact, and started looking at PC games because basically the virtual reality pipeline, like you work in Unity, you work in Unreal, it's very similar to kind of like the gaming production pipeline. And my colleagues had worked in gaming, and so we decided, like, let's start a new company, let's leave the virtual reality company, let's start something new, and let's kind of focus it around social in a way that is not just about short-term goals. Like a lot of the kind of multiplayer online social games are very much like burn and churn through the players. Like games where you're just kind of shooting each other in the head for 20 minutes and and then you never see those players again and then you have a whole new group. So we
Hmm.
were really trying to think like, especially if online and virtual worlds are becoming the prevalent place where younger generations are also doing most of their socialization, like what are they being taught in those settings, right? What are the kind of incentives that they're learning? And how much is that bleeding into their real lives, right? And is that healthy? So we started doing a lot of research into that, like doing tons of research like into Roblox and Minecraft and Second Life and all these other social worlds that had already existed. And then came up with a concept of what we wanted to build, and yeah, left. And I think about a year after we left the virtual reality studio, we launched that game studio and started building it up.
Wow. I'm just thinking about like where we started the conversation to like where we are. Uh, it's really, really cool that
Yeah.
you've been able to be part of so many different organizations with so many different roles. So as you kind of take on this new role of, starting a new company, what were you learning at that time as someone who's maybe worked at other companies to help them be successful, but now kind of starting your own?
Yeah, it was a big learning curve, right? But I do think I read so many books in preparation, all of the kind of like cliche books I think everyone reads when they want to be an entrepreneur and start their own thing. And I really feel like nothing prepares you as much as just doing it because
Mhm.
it's so hard. I would say the biggest, most important thing is setting the culture early correctly. And it seems like I think people underestimate it and feel like, oh, it's a soft skill thing or like it's not as important as all the other things. But I do really think spending the time that we did on culture and really hiring for mission especially, I mean, it depends on what kind of company you're building, right? But if you're a mission-based company, really hiring for people who are true believers, especially in the early days, I think is kind of a make or break situation. So that was the other I think really big thing I learned as part of that process was like don't rush the hiring in those early days. Really think about who are the people you want by your side that you want to grow alongside and that you wanna be, like, in the trenches with because it gets really, really, really hard. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think first just picking the right like co-founders
yeah.
is already a huge kind of mountain to climb. Figuring out who are the right people with the right skills, and also they work well together as a team. And then your initial hires, right? That they're kind of coming in and adding to that dynamic and elevating your company to work in this collaborative way that moves everything forward. So, how did you think about that like co-founder dynamic in those early days of that company? And, you know, what did you take away? As you reflect back, not being at that company, I know
Yeah.
you're going to talk about what you've started a little bit later.
Yeah. I mean, very luckily that I had worked with 2 of the co-founders previously, which I think is a huge, like, cheat code, right? Because you already know how people act in the good and the bad times, which is one of the
Hmm.
hardest situations when it's someone brand new that you've not worked with before. So that was huge. Like, people that I knew were incredibly passionate about, the mission and that we would all make the decision to have each other's back when we really knew we needed to. And then our other co-founder that we had not worked with previously, we knew that we needed someone who was really good in economics for gaming and specifically for the kind of social gaming structure that we wanted to build. And there's only like a handful of people, I think, in the world who are really the top of the industry in this field. And so it was during COVID when we were first, kind of forming the team, reaching out to people, which kind of ended up being lucky for us in that everyone was stuck at home. And so we had a lot more access to people that I think we probably would have. And we found this one major economist that we like had read all of his papers and there was over like 200 pages of his papers that we had put into a document, read everything. We're like, this is the guy. And we just cold outreach to him on LinkedIn and, put together all his documents. And we're like, we read every single piece of this. Like, this is our kind of manifesto of what we want to do. This is why we think you're perfect to work with us. Like, if you happen to be free or even just like can give us advice, like, we'd love to chat with
Hmm.
you. And he reached back out to us and he ended up becoming one of our co founders. So it was like that one was really about like just finding someone who shared again our kind of like ideals and had that really intense design thinking and economic background that would just be a huge value add to the team.
So I guess what I'm thinking is, how did you go from like that cold message to building the relationship to then inviting this person to become a co-founder? Because I think what I hear a lot is like, oh, this person's technical and I need this technical skill on my team. So yeah, I should maybe just start working with this person, right? But I think
Yeah.
there's this kind of in between steps that I think would be helpful for founders to take when they're considering a co-founder.
Yeah. I mean, we did again, it was during COVID, right? So you're all kind of trapped in your houses. We did calls every single day for I think a month, like legitimately long, like 3 to 6 hour long calls, like to really dive very deeply in to all of the main parts of the game design, talk about what was important to all of us. Like we spent a lot of time, and it's like it's painful to be on calls that long, right? It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's not easy.
Yes.
But we really all, I think like we all kind of made that like mutual sacrifice and just showed like how important this was to all of us. And at the end of it, we're like, okay, like this makes sense. Let's start moving forward. So yeah, I wasn't like, oh, hey, you match this profile. Let's do it. It was like, no, we all really need to understand each other and what each other
Yeah.
wants and the vision for the product that we're going to build.
That's no, thank you for sharing that piece because I think it's important to take the time, to make sure this person you're inviting into your company is, someone you can trust, someone who's going to add in the way you think they will. So having some time to really evaluate that on both ends, right? Maybe for that
Yeah.
person, it also has to make sense to come in and join. So
Yeah.
and so you have this team and you're moving forward. What else are you learning in this first company that you created?
Oh my gosh, so much. I feel like I learned everything. Like it was trial under fire for sure. Definitely learned about just like scaling the team. So we scaled up to about 30 people. And so things changed so much. And that, that's not even a gigantic team, but when you're first building the company and you're like three of you and then you go to 30, things change a lot. So yeah, just really thinking. And it was also a completely remote team. As I said, we started the company during COVID and we continued it remote afterwards. So really thinking about how do you continue to like harbor connection between the team when you're scaling up and you're getting so much bigger, and just making sure that communication is as efficient as possible because you can lose so much time in just like how people communicate things. That was huge. Also, just I think the biggest thing was really like keeping the team's focus on the mission of what we were building in terms of also like the product features and how that came through. And then all like the boring stuff, like all the stuff you don't want to think about from the operations perspective, and like taxes and how to deal with like research and development costs and like all of that that I had never been in the weeds of before,
Mhm.
which are good skills to have and to understand, but it was like not as fun. Not as fun not as fun to take on.
Yeah, there's definitely pieces where, it's just something that has to be done. It's not adding
Yeah.
to the mission or, the product you're trying to grow. So, what made you kind of decide to go to your next opportunity and
Yeah. So basically in gaming, the way that you build is you'll usually build out like you'll raise some money and then you'll deliver like the early access or the first playable of
Mhm,
the game. And I would say like comparable games to what we were building like had raised like 50 million, like 40 million, 50 million. We had raised a smaller first seed round,
mhm,
and we were building off of that with the team, and we were just delivering that first playable so then we could go out, fundraise, and either talk with a publisher or get like VC investment money again to go for the bigger part of the game. So we released early access on the floor of GDC, which is the big gaming conference actually here in San Francisco. And it was kind of this incredible moment. We were super excited. It was everything we'd been working up to. And at that point, we really had like an all-star team. Like one of the co-founder, or actually no, three of the co-founders of Call of Duty were on our team. We had people from like Zynga, someone left Epic Games to work with us. Like it was really like
wow.
the biggest all-star lineup like you could kind of think of. And everything was really lined up. We had investment lined up. Like everything was kind of looking perfect. We are kind of on that perfect like rocket trajectory to where we wanted to go. And then everything kind of fell apart in the macro situation for gaming. So I don't know if you would have, it's kind of like a niche community and like knowledge about it, so maybe you wouldn't have heard about it. But there was that period like right after COVID where basically the gaming industry started to have a big downward trend because
Mm,
everyone had been trapped in their houses. So
mhm.
the gaming industry was like bloop, like going up
Yeah.
like this, like we have
Mhm.
been. And then as soon as everyone was kind of released, which is when we were going for that second raise with the product, it was like a downward line, right?
Mm.
And it was just kind of like a normalization of the fact that like everyone had been trapped in their houses, but it spooked a lot of publishers, it spooked a lot of the money. There was major layoffs, like I can't remember the exact number. I want to say like 15,000 layoffs within some very short period in the gaming industry. A bunch of people started closing like their gaming arms of their company. So it was kind of just like a major bloodbath.
Mhm.
So I would say that's the other thing I learned in my time is like timing can be everything. Like
Yeah.
if you have everything else and timing is not there, I think timing is one of the most important key things you have to success because with timing comes so much momentum. And if you can't get that momentum underneath you, then it's very, very difficult. So, yeah, so we lost the investments that we were supposed to be getting, tried to get it back. And then Silicon Valley Bank also had their huge collapse. So it was kind of like one thing after another that was just the timing was really bad for us. And so
Yeah.
we had to end up closing the company after after that, we'd still had, a decent amount of runway. So we had talked with the team. We're like, look, we're trying to get everything back on track as good as we can, but there's studios like left and right closing around us.
Mhm.
So you guys should all be thinking about like what are your next steps and if you guys need, people have mortgages, people have 5 kids on our team, like there's a lot
Yeah.
of responsibilities. So after we had kind of made the final decision to close down, the biggest thing that was kind of on my mind was how can I help as many people as possible to find their next opportunity?
Mhm.
And we loved the team so much and had spent so much time building it up. So that was especially as like a first time founder who's like not had the weight of people's livelihood on my back before. Like
Mhm.
it was incredibly, incredibly hard to make that decision to close. And so I was like, what can I do? What's the best thing I can do now with my time for all these people who helped make our company such a success and help build this beautiful product? So yeah, so some people, landed jobs quickly, but the industry was, as I said, really hard to get a job in. So
Mhm.
spent a lot of time like taking some people to events, helping them network, making introductions for them. And as part of that and also going to a lot of events and things myself, right? To try and see how I could find them opportunities or how I could find this other funding. And what struck me really intensely was like, why are all of the tools for meeting the right people at events so terrible? like I think I got matched with someone at one of these events who like we didn't even speak the same language somehow, and like somehow the app did not like bring this bring this forward. And there was so I had spent, like an hour in traffic to get to that meeting and go across town. And it's just like so much opportunity cost for things that I think are very easy to solve in the networking and matchmaking platform spaces. And
Mhm.
so started digging into that after we closed the company, and especially with all of the new things going on in the artificial intelligence space, I was like, this should be a better user experience. Like the algorithms should be way better than this. Like this seems like a problem that I think there's just a lot of kind of larger incumbents who have taken this space and just aren't really doing anything interesting with it.
Mhm.
So I started digging into like how could I help solve this problem and do it better than what's being done right now. And that's basically how I got to where the current company started.
Wow, there's so much in that last segment, but I think, as I was listening to you talk about like how you're kind of on this high, right? As you mentioned, and then you kind of feel this collapse, as you mentioned, like with the timing and everything, a lot out of your control, right? So the company's doing great, and then all of a sudden there's this downturn, and you're not expecting it, and instead your company closes. How do you deal with that? Because I imagine like founders have to kind of maybe grieve or, just kind of deal with some of those emotions. So, what worked for you or what helped you during that time?
Yeah. So as I said, it was really difficult decision to make, and we really tried to exhaust every option we could before we made that decision. And so the whole process of even deciding was like a really big mourning period. I think for me. Definitely tapped into, my kind of peer circle. And I actually didn't have that many founder peers at the time because I was living in Los Angeles. It made sense for our company because we were in the gaming space and a lot of the team lived in LA. But I would say starting a company in LA is very lonely because there's just less of the founder community. Like now I'm in San Francisco and almost all my friends are founders and are going through very similar kind of trials and tribulations and successes. So it's much easier, I think, to be a founder when you have that community around you who understands you. So I would say that was hard because I had a community, but they couldn't fully understand, I think, what I was going through.
Hmm.
And then I also, I worked closely like our advisors and kind of my mentors. I definitely tapped into through the process because they had companies, in their life. So that was probably the most helpful advice that I got. And yeah, just like kind of took it day by day and tried to like understand that it's really hard to start a company and not to kind of, take all the blame on myself so harshly and kind of like just come to terms with everything. And also I think just really realizing that so much value had grown out of everything that we built and like just the incredible team we brought together and how they splintered off to work together and how, I'm still the current team that I'm working with are all people I worked with at my last company. So
Hmm.
it's like those relationships don't die, right? Ideas die, companies die, but the connections you make, I think if you treat people the way people should be treated and you really value those collaborations, those continue to compound over time. So I think really focusing on the fact that so much value grew out of this, even though it didn't end exactly how I wanted it to.
I think that's a beautiful message. Yeah, because I think this is the exact scenario that stops a lot of people from even starting and trying to kind of say, well, what if it fails? And, a lot of companies do fail, right? So it's a legitimate fear. But I think having this perspective or lens that regardless, I'll build these connections and I'm not walking away with nothing, right? And that leads to your next company. As you mentioned, you identified a problem at a networking event. And how did you approach that with your co founders? You mentioned you already worked with them. So, how did you kind of take it to the next level to say, let's do something about this?
Yeah, well, I think we all knew pretty much everyone from the last company was like, if we can work with you again, we want to, right? And like, what are you
Hmm.
going to do next kind of situation. So that was really nice. So I always knew from the beginning of closing the last company it was either that I was gonna go, work somewhere else potentially, and I did some consulting stuff for a little bit in the in between, but really I was like, I still have it in me that I wanna give it another go. And I knew I wanted to work with people from the previous company, so that was always, like, kind of a given. Like, I wasn't interested in looking for new co-founders or, like, starting an idea on myself because I think, as I kinda said throughout, like, I think people and connection make everything worth it. So, like, I'm
Hmm.
not someone who would be a solo founder, I think, in any situation because I'm in it for, like, the co-op game experience.
Yeah.
So, basically, we just had started chatting so my previous co-founder is also my current co-founder, and just started chatting about, like, this is actually a very similar to space to what we were doing before, just with a new application. Because in the last company, we were really trying to think, like, how do we make better social games that have better matchmaking for players and have longer term incentives? And
Mm.
an event is kind of like a big multiplayer game when you think about it, where people are just paying like though maybe $1,000 to be there and show up not knowing anybody, not having like any objectives of where to go and just feeling kind of lost at sea. And so we started just kind of ideating around okay, if we treat this kind of like a multiplayer game and the incentive is to find that one kind of needle in the haystack that can 10x your odds of success based on whatever KPI you're going into the event with, that's kind of how we should look at it. So how can we make networking easier? How can we make it more fun and make you feel like you have a little sidekick? Like in so many games, there's like a little sidekick by you who's kind of like helping you and giving you tips as you go throughout the landscape or in the environment. So how can we do that? How can we just make it a funner user experience from like A to Z? and then just kind of started diving into it. And what was the first thing the first kind of like big catalyst for us was we got into Founders Inc., which
Mm,
is a accelerator here in San Francisco. And that's actually what brought us up into the city. So previously had been in Los Angeles, got into this accelerator. It was kind of the perfect, just kind of like proving ground where we could start to like build the product as fast as possible, get into people's hands, and start experimenting. So it's kind of where we began.
What was that experience like in the accelerator? I imagine some founders who are maybe listening to this are not familiar with accelerators or just want to know maybe what your perspective is. What did you walk away with at the end of your time there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I walked away with was to build and ship things as fast as possible. And especially coming from the previous company, which was kind of like AAA gaming background, where you build for a very long time
Mhm,
before any players are getting hands on your tools. So, like the team is playing, but there's a very big opportunity cost to creating a build that you can ship out to people that works on their computers. Like, it's very time intensive. So in the last company, it was like, okay, do we make the decision of spending a month optimizing the build so people can play it and we can get feedback, or do we keep building
mhm,
new parts of the product? Whereas in what we're building now, it was very fast and easy to get feedback within days of like our first idea, right?
mhm,
And so I think that was the biggest thing for sure, and the biggest change of kind of culture from the
mhm.
last company to this one is like, even if it sucks, get it out to people as fast as possible, because you're just going to learn so much more, even if it's in a state that you're not super proud of, than if you just keep on like polishing it and not letting anybody see it for a long time. You're just gonna move way faster if you can keep shipping, shipping, shipping.
No, I think that's a struggle, I think, in early stage sometimes for first time founders, right? To kind of wait a little too long to just kind of put it out there and see what users actually think. And how did you find the users? What was kind of some of those initial
Yeah, yeah.
strategies to just get some feedback?
Yeah. So the first thing we did was actually use the cohort that we were in, right? So basically at the end of each week, we would have a opportunity of like 2 minutes to present what we'd worked on, what were our challenges. And instead of kind of using that time to kind of like level review things, I created an event on Luma. And I was like, I'm creating an event for this cohort. And I put up a QR code. I was like, everyone sign it. I'll help you find the best connections within the cohort. And so that was like the very first event that we did, right?
Mhm,
We had, I think it was like 80% of the group opted in and signed up for it. And at that point, it was like still so broken. I remember like going into that presentation, I was like, "Should I be doing this? It seems like such a bad idea." But I was like, "If I don't do this now, then I'm losing a week of getting that first initial feedback." So
yeah.
I did it, and I'm really glad. Like there was tons of bugs and tons of issues, and like times where I was just like manually texting people because it wasn't working, and like, but it was great, and it was definitely the right decision to just kind of dive into the fire.
No, I'm really glad you made that decision because, like you said, you saved yourself a week and you probably saw, okay, well, this bug we can kind of deprioritize, and here are things we actually need to really fix because it
Yeah.
really impacts the user. And so once you're done with the accelerator, what was your next step to kind of start to get a little bit more information?
Yeah, so we also so even during the accelerator, the big thing that I started to do was to host my own events, actual events, in
Mhm,
the city. And so it was something that I was passionate about doing anyways, and it was the perfect way for also us to get new users, right? And to be able to test it in different situations. So I started just building like a community on Luma of founders and throwing interesting events that I would wanna go to and doing panels with different kind of thought leaders in the space, and I just started like, I knew nobody in the city when I first arrived, and I just started reaching out to people and being like, "Hey, do you wanna be on this panel? Do you wanna talk about AI?" Or I did, like, a women in tech panel, and So I just started organizing a lot of these and continuously like growing our subscriber base on Luma and getting as much feedback and like changing the prompt for each event and seeing how like these small changes affected the UX and really just kind of went from there. It was really just more of like kind of a R&D mentality that we just wanted to kind of like play around with as many different inputs as we could and see what changed in the outcome of the matches. And yeah, that was kind of like our first few months was really just kind of like playing around with it and seeing what insights we could learn.
And what did you end up learning through those events? How did that inform your product and vision?
Yeah. Yeah, so it made it very clear this is a need that people have, especially here in San Francisco. It's such a good city to build this kind of product in because there's so many events every single day.
Hmm.
Um, like on average, there's like 27 events. They're just like AI tech events in the city.
Yeah.
So it's like it's kind of the perfect place to be for it and definitely learned that a lot of people go into these events with a very specific goal, right? People are not going to events for the most part to like listen to panels or or to hear new ideas. Like they're all really coming in with specific objectives that they want to be help fulfilled by meeting whoever it is in the room that can help them achieve whatever it is. And that a lot of people feel very lonely, that a lot of people who sign up for a lot of events will end up not going, not because they don't want to meet people, but because they feel like they are more introverted or they're kind of socially awkward and they don't want to go in and have to introduce themselves cold to somebody.
Mm-mm.
And so what I was really learning is like people want to feel like they have that warm intro to somebody. And
Mm.
even if it's just as simple as, getting that email introduction that's like, "Hey, Meg, you should meet Dar. You're both going to be here and you both like pickleball." Like
Hmm.
it's so simple, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not an incredibly complex situation, but it just lets someone be like, "Oh, there's someone at that event who is eager to meet me. I'm
Hmm.
not just like a nobody walking into that room." And I think that psychological shift we saw, especially through all the testing that we did, was huge, was really
Mm.
huge and impactful to the users.
Do you see that increases attendance for like events when you
Yeah,
already have
yeah.
this warm intro?
Yeah, I would say we see on average, like between the people who use Gabi at an event or who don't use Gabi at the event, we've seen like up to like 2x increase in attendance in the group that's using Gabi and has
Wow.
matches, especially with free events in the city, right? Because it's like a lot of these events are free. And so, and it's, it's 7 p.m. rolls around and you're like, okay, do I keep answering emails? Do I watch Netflix? Do I just stay home? Or do I
Yeah.
actually go? And so it adds that additional kind of like social peer pressure and just
Hmm.
excitement to be like, oh, there's actually someone who will notice I'm not there. So it definitely makes a really big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. No, because I've hosted events in collaboration with like other groups, and we notice like a lot of people will sign up and then maybe like 40% of the people like show up to the event. So if you can increase that to like 80%, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's huge. And we also just saw, we did a new kind of like analysis of all the events we've done in the last, I think, 8 months. And we have like 100% retention on people who have gone and use Gabi at past events, and then they've gone
Mhm.
to a new event, 100% retention on those people. So that
Wow.
definitely seems like people want to have that ally in finding connections.
Yeah. No, I think it's incredible because a lot of people are afraid for like cold messaging or it's just like a barrier, and then to just kind of walk up to someone random and just be like, "Hey," it can be
Yeah.
awkward, and I've seen that people hesitate to do it. So I can definitely see where this could fit in. And who is your ICP? So there's like the people at the event using the app, but who is like your primary customer?
Yeah. So, well, I think we cut our teeth, I think, on a lot of these Luma events. It's not actually our ICP. So after we had kind of done a bunch of this R&D and really thought about who we need to be serving in the first iteration of the product, we actually started then to work with larger conference organizers, like
Mhm.
summits, multi-day, especially because these are the people, the attendees have a higher ROI, right?
Yeah.
Because they're putting so much money into attending these events. They're flying places, they have hotels, they have expensive fees that they're paying.
Mhm.
And if we can get in with just one big organizer, we can get distribution to 20,000 people for one event, right?
Right.
And so then we really started focusing on, okay, let's actually make the move away from the kind of smaller Luma events. It was helpful for that kind of like first R&D period, but pivoting more towards the ICP being like event organizers so that we're actually B2B to begin,
Mhm.
and then we can make the switch to B2C after we've built the network enough.
Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I'm sure these events or summits, that people are organizing, they also want to provide this value, right? That's kind of the
Yeah.
biggest sale is like, hey, come network. You're going to meet people that are valuable to you and your business. So if they can make that even better, that experience even better, and there's retention there, I'm sure it's a huge win for them to include something like this for their
Yeah.
event.
Yeah, exactly. One of the big conference that we did at the end of last year was called Vid Summit, which is Mr. Beast's big like YouTube content creator conference that happens in Dallas. And that was we were able to get really great results and interesting data from that. One of the intros that we made actually led to like a 22x ROI for one of the people who came because they inked a big sponsorship deal. So, and that like the tickets to go to Vid Summit, I think are up to like $1,500.
Hmm.
So we were able to like very much do the math on like, okay, these are all the intros we're making. This is what it's leading to for the outcomes for these creators. And then for us to be able to go back and show Vid Summit and other conferences, like, look, this is what you can now tell your attendees, right? Is that in using our product and like baking it into the current event app or whatever it is that they're already using, they can make really tangible advances for their companies.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And congrats on that, because I think that is obviously just going to lead to bigger and bigger things.
Yeah.
And so, did you guys already raise funding, or are you in the process of raising funding? What's the
Yeah,
step
so we're
there?
not we're not currently raising, but we are going to very soon.
Okay.
So it's definitely we really wanted to hold off on raising any funding until we understood what was the plan to scale with that funding. I think it can be tempting, especially like in San Francisco, because everyone's constantly raising all the time to take money early when you're just kind of like figuring things out. But especially I think as second time founders, we're like, let's just like not have that hanging over our head. Like, let's really just be all about the product and the users. And because fundraising is also, its own beast that
Hmm.
takes its time and takes away your attention. So, yeah, I would definitely suggest to try to hold off as long as you can to other founders who may be
Yeah.
watching, and do it when you understand like what are you using that capital for very specifically, and how are you like scaling something that you've already proven you have traction around and market validation.
Yeah. I think one question that comes up is maybe, how confident are you to reach that next milestone, right? And if you feel like, hey, if I had funding, I feel really confident in doing it
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
already see all these validations or all these things that are signaling that, I can scale. I think that's probably a good exercise to probably sit down into because it's like, what would you do with the funding is a fundamental question everyone should ask before they start.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree.
So in your previous company, you did go through funding and raising. So you're familiar with like what it takes and what investors are maybe looking for and how you kind of close that deal. What is your advice for founders that may be in that process?
Yeah, I think doing the research to really understand which investors are aligned with you on their thesis and just how they're thinking about the world and their investments, because it is a long-term relationship, right? Your investors can have a big effect on the trajectory of your company. I think also trying to keep your fundraising process as tight as possible. So like when you do decide that it's go time and you're going to fundraise, like knowing that you've already lined up enough kind of warm conversations with investors so that when you go into it you're able to kind of keep it to like a 2 to 3 week period with a clear beginning and end point and not let it kind of drag on for months and months and months. Because yeah, I think also investors are very FOMO driven, even like the smart ones who might share your thesis. Like, I think if you don't have the momentum and like the energy behind the deal, then they can just keep waiting, right? They can be like,
Mm,
well, let's see what happens next month. Like,
right. Right.
and then the deal kind of goes to die.
Mhm.
So making sure that you're running the fundraising process in a way that like you're have consistent energy throughout it and you're working towards that end goal and also not just like educating a bunch of analysts on your approach and wasting your time because your time is so valuable, right? Like every minute you're not building or with users is time that is wasted. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think also not letting investors waste your time, like being very clear, like, this is step one, this is step two. Yeah, don't spend like hours on a call with them if it isn't clear that it's really going to
Mhm.
lead to a term sheet or a safe being signed or something.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of being honest with yourself, to just kind of
Yeah.
recognize, "Hey, this actually isn't going anywhere. I'm just,
Yeah.
spinning something here," 'cause that can easily happen. 'Cause I think for some people, it's probably like, "Well, this is kind of interesting. Maybe if it feels like, oh, they all of a sudden have this momentum, I could get on that." So I can also see that temptation on the investor side to just say, "Oh, keep me updated," right?
Yeah.
So yeah. And when you're speaking with investors, what are some things you're trying to communicate and just be clear on so that they understand, what you're building, what you're offering, and why they should invest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, especially when you're speaking with investors to like, because there's a difference between like the big vision of what you're building and maybe your tactical next steps, right? Like there can be a lot of space in between them. So I think making sure to communicate the big vision so that they understand this is a venture scale business, right? Because there's lots of great businesses that are just not venture investable, right? Because like
Yeah.
you need to be able to have these outsized returns for the funds. Like they're not getting into it for like a 5x. So it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
you need to be able like to scale to millions and millions of users or, whatever your business model looks like. So like for us specifically, like what we really are in like the larger vision is a social recommendation engine that can span for anywhere you go. Like anywhere you go, we help you meet the right people under whatever circumstance you need, but we're starting with events, right? So like our roadmap goes far beyond events and the B2B is really just this first wedge into the space
Hmm.
because it's very hard to go direct to consumer in the social space. So I think it's really important to convey whatever your wedge is like just the first step in a larger plan. So I think
Yeah.
because if not, you're not investable if you're not making that very clear in
Hmm.
your communication.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great point. So to kind of shift a little bit as you're looking at your team, like, do you have a team? Like, have you hired people or is it you and your co-founder? What is the mix right now?
Yeah, so I have co-founder Cedric, and we just brought on a new co-founder JT, who also was our head of game design at the last company, and then we have a founding engineer CTO, and that's it. So it's just the four of us for now, but it's really everything we need for now. And as I'm sure you know, like with all the AI tools, like teams are staying much smaller and leaner than ever
Yeah.
before. So
Yeah. No, I think
yeah,
it's
so
it's
it's
a huge
crazy.
opportunity, like you said, to kind of keep going for maybe a little bit longer without funding and to really gain that momentum for your startup so that when you do go in for the investment, it's much more clear. Like
Yeah.
here's what we've experienced and seen, and here's what we're going to see in the next phase. So that's great. And I'm really excited to see just how this scales. So this episode will release in the summer probably. So hopefully people can take advantage of, your information and line up something for Q4 or, hey, the following year, depending on what you have available. And the last question I usually ask is just, what resources have helped you along your career journey and also building a startup that other people can look into. So this can be books, podcasts, advisors, mentors, coaches.
Man, it's hard to say. Definitely. I mean, if you're in San Francisco, and specifically if you're like a woman working in tech or building a company, I think definitely tapping into the different communities here has been incredible for me. And like I said, something I didn't have when I was in LA. So like the Echo Her community where we met, of course,
Yeah.
definitely like tapping into these communities, going to these events. Women X AI, which is run by Jenny K. Pollock, is one of my favorite communities, and has been such a like lifeline for me. As soon as I moved here, it was one of the first events I ever went to and led to so many incredible connections and friendships. So I would say one, like finding your community, because it is a really big level up. And in terms of podcasts that have been really helpful, like Diary of a CEO is always fun, like to listen to the different founders who go on it and have talked about their experiences. What other resources? And then, I mean, resources in terms of just like, I think anyone should be using like the different AI tools that are available that can help you move faster and build faster, and like Claude Code and all these different tools that enable previously non-technical people to be technical in ways that they never could have before.
Yeah.
So like doing tutorials on YouTube of how to use these tools and just experimenting with them, I think can move you much faster.
Thank you so much for sharing all those recommendations. And I mean, I think community is definitely very, very important. Echo Her is an amazing resource. The other one you mentioned, Women X
Women
AI,
X AI.
is also great. And we also host like founder circles. So that's kind of the whole theme of it, is to bring founders together, and they hold each other accountable and help to move things forward. So you don't feel so alone in the process, because it is really tough to build something. So all the support you can get. But thank you so much for taking the time to share your story. It's super inspiring, and I'm really excited to see everything that's coming up for you, and can't wait for people to hear this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was super fun.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the Little Pursuits podcast. Please follow, subscribe, and share this with one builder who needs it. Check out the show notes for links to connect with us and our guests.